Hello, my name's Tim Kenny from Tim Kenny Surveying, and in this video I want to talk a bit about seller surveys. Just to kind of declare a little bit of my kind of background, my past history, I originally entered this profession as a home inspector. So I was trained to produce home condition reports that were going to go into the home information pack, and they were a kind of a seller survey. So it's something I'm always kind of been aware of, comfortable with. It's what I initially learned to do. But what I think is really interesting is that whenever this gets discussed in surveyors forums and with surveyors in person, the first thing a lot of surveyors will say is, oh no, you can't do those. There's a huge amount of liability involved in that. You know, anybody interested in buying that house can pick up that survey and you could be liable to everybody. You know, it's unlimited to all these people that could come in and read that survey. And just in some way that makes sense. The problem is it's also nonsense. It doesn't really work like that. So in reality, any survey you produce is only ever going to be, your liability can only extend to the person who owns that property, or a person who doesn't own the property at the time you produce the survey and they own it afterwards, i.e. the eventual person who buys that property. So if I produce a seller survey, so I'm instructed by the seller to inspect their property and produce a report as to its condition at that time, and obviously then put it on the market, make that survey available to everybody, the only person who could ever eventually make a claim, even if we accept that my liability can extend to buyers, is the eventual buyer, because they are the only person who can demonstrate a loss if there was some error or omission within that report. Anybody who's just picked up and read it and doesn't buy the house, where's their loss? You know, what are they claiming for? So in fact, there's no liability. Your liability is exactly the same. You have one person or one party who can make a claim on that report. However, that doesn't mean to my mind they are stress free. There are some concerns and issues and things that I need to kind of think about and be aware of. For me, as a small business owner, I'm effectively a micro business. I don't have any admin support. It's just me. If a client rings up, it's me they're going to speak to. Because if I produce a seller survey and it goes out and it's provided to all the buyers that want to buy that house, of course, what are all the buyers going to do when they read that survey and they want to know a bit more? They're going to ring the surveyor whose name was at the bottom of the report and they're going to ask some questions. And of course, that means I've got to deal with the questions that come in. I've got to answer them and I've got all these people ringing me up. So there's kind of a little bit of thought to balancing that up with seller surveys. That's kind of one of the things that I've, concerned me, and one of the reasons I've never really kind of moved into that space in any meaningful way, even though I think it is something that it is going to come about as a bit more of a common product. There's also issues around the buyer understanding the terms and limitations of that survey. So obviously if I'm providing a survey directly to a buyer, I'm instructed by that buyer, I'm going to give them a set of my terms of engagement to read. I'm going to have a conversation with them about their needs and interest in the property. I'm going to make sure they understand what I'm going to do for them, and obviously more importantly what I can't do for them, what I'm prevented from either practically or physically from doing in terms of the information I can provide to them. Of course, if I'm not instructed by that buyer directly, I'm instructed by the seller, then I don't have the same opportunity to have the conversation with them. So the person who is I eventually have liability or has could be liable to, hasn't inherently discussed the nature of the survey, and they haven't gone through that same process. So there could be a kind of a little bit of a possibility for friction at that point. And again, that's something that if you are offering those products, you need to think about quite carefully. I'm not saying that's insurmountable, and there is some good logic around why that's not particularly a problem, particularly the fact that a buyer can also always instruct their own surveyor to carry out. So they don't have to choose to rely on your report. They have the options to instruct a further inspection of the property. As I say, all of this kind of works in Scotland. Obviously there are flaws in that system. It's not an ideal system, and I could pick holes in the quality or the kind of the basis for the reporting in that. But we do have a framework for it. As I said, I think this is something that's important for us as surveyors to consider, think about. I know it's something that's been bubbling around. Obviously, I know from own experience, we're talking 20 years ago, we had the home condition report and it was pulled out. it was pulled out for good reasons at the time. It's possible that those reasons are starting to tail off, and we might see change, particularly when markets hit sort of sticky points, as we kind of are in now, and it being used as an additional kind of tool for sellers to help sell their properties. So as I said, I think it's something that is going to kind of come about in some way, shape or form. So I think it's something we as the surveying profession and surveyors need to start thinking about, being aware of and understanding what it really means. But I say the main thing from this is that default, no, it's really strong liability. We need to kind of lose that idea, because it just doesn't follow through in logic or practice. I say, if you disagree, that's fine. Let me know. I think these are really important conversations to be having, so pop it in the comments, tell me what you think. Always helpful. Thank you very much.